The lights went out at exactly 11:47 p.m. Naomi Hensley's hands froze mid-wipe on the marble countertop. The crystal chandelier above her head died with a soft electrical hum, plunging the east wing into absolute darkness. Outside, thunder cracked like a gunshot. Rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows hard enough to rattle the glass. She stood perfectly still, cleaning rag clutched in one fist, her breath shallow and quick. The mansion had never felt this empty before. The other staff had left hours ago, right after the charity gala ended, right after the last politician shook hands with the last CEO and climbed into their black sedans. She'd volunteered to stay. Stupid. She always volunteered to stay. Her mother's voice echoed in her head, the same warning she'd given Naomi since she was 16. Keep your head down. Do your work. Don't ask questions. That's how people like us survive. People like us. The invisible ones. The ones who cleaned up after the powerful and pretended not to see the stains that wouldn't come out. Naomi had been working at La Casa Valloni for 3 years. 3 years of polishing silver that cost more than her yearly salary. 3 years of walking past rooms where men in $1,000 suits discussed things she wasn't supposed to hear. 3 years of being a ghost in a house full of ghosts. Now she was alone, or so she thought. The sound came from behind her. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Shoes on marble, echoing through the darkness like a metronome counting down to something terrible. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Naomi's pulse hammered in her throat. She turned, but saw nothing, just black space and the faint outline of doorways lit by distant lightning. The storm had knocked out power to the entire estate. The backup generators should have kicked in by now. They always did. The fact that they hadn't meant someone had disabled them. Someone wanted the darkness. Who's there? Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. No answer. Just those footsteps getting closer. She could hear the rhythm of them now. Measured, confident, the walk of someone who owned every inch of ground they touched. She took a step back. Her hip bumped the counter. The cleaning supplies rattled. Glass cleaner, polish, the sound absurdly loud in the suffocating quiet. Somewhere in the house, a door creaked open. The storm outside grew louder, angrier, like it was trying to drown out whatever was about to happen. Naomi's fingers found her phone in her apron pocket. Dead. She'd forgotten to charge it after the gala. Of course, the one night she needed it most. Then a voice cut through the darkness, calm, deep, dangerously close. You shouldn't be here this late, Naomi. Her breath caught. She knew that voice. Everyone who worked at La Casa Valloni knew that voice. It was the kind of voice that made senators stammer and billionaires check their bank accounts. The kind of voice that sounded reasonable right up until the moment it ordered your execution. Dante Valloni, the gentleman butcher, third-generation Mafia, Don-turned-luxury empire magnate. The man who smiled at cameras and signed checks for orphanages while his enemies disappeared without trials or graves. Forbes called him a philanthropist. The FBI called him untouchable. The streets called him something else entirely. Lightning flashed. For half a second, she saw him, standing in the doorway, dressed in a black shirt with the sleeves rolled up, eyes like smoke and ice. His jawline was sharp enough to cut glass, his posture relaxed but predatory. He looked like a Renaissance painting of the devil. Then darkness swallowed him again. Naomi's hands trembled. She pressed them flat against the counter to hide it. Her mind raced through possibilities. Run? There were guards outside. Scream? No one would hear her over the storm. Talk her way out? With what words? I was just finishing the east wing, Mr. Valloni. I'll be done soon. Another flash of lightning. He was closer now. 5 feet away. Maybe 4. She could see the faint outline of his shoulders, the way his head tilted slightly as he studied her. I've been watching you, he said quietly. Her stomach dropped. The words weren't threatening on the surface, but the subtext was clear. He'd been watching, observing, waiting for the right moment. You listened too much. The words landed like a blade between her ribs. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. All she could do was stand there while the storm raged and the darkness pressed in, and Dante Valloni stood close enough that she could smell his cologne, expensive, woodsy, suffocating. Bergamot and cedar and something darker underneath. Blood, maybe. Or just money. She forced herself to speak. I only do my job, sir. He didn't respond right away. Just watched her. She could feel his gaze even though she couldn't see it. It was the kind of attention that stripped you down to your bones, that saw every lie you'd ever told yourself. The silence stretched. 5 seconds. 10. 20. Each one felt like an hour. Then he smiled. Not cruel. Not kind. Just dangerous. Then tell me, Naomi. His voice dropped lower, intimate and threatening at once. Why were you in my study yesterday? Alone. The question hit her like a physical blow. Her knees went weak. He knew. Of course he knew. Men like Dante Villoni didn't miss anything. They built empires on knowing things other people try to hide. Would you run or face him? Drop your answer in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that'll keep you up at night. 48 hours earlier, Naomi had made the mistake that would change everything. It started with a trash bag. She'd been cleaning Dante's private study. The one place in the mansion where staff weren't supposed to linger. Dust the shelves. Empty the bins. Get out. Those were the rules. Simple. Clear. Survival depended on following them. But that morning, something felt off. The study usually smelled like leather and cigars. That morning, it smelled like smoke. Not cigar smoke, something sharper. Chemical. The kind of smell that comes from burning things you don't want found. The trash can next to his desk was overflowing with shredded paper. Black ink on white fragments, torn so small they looked like confetti. She'd grabbed the bag without thinking, tied it off, turned to leave. That's when she saw it. A piece of paper on the floor. Must have fallen when she lifted the bag. She bent down, picked it up. The ink was still wet in some places, smudged but readable. Transfers. Offshore, Cayman, L. Marcelli. Her hands went cold. Luca Marcelli, Dante's right-hand man. The one who died 2 nights ago in a car crash on the way to Manhattan. The one everyone whispered about in the kitchen when they thought no one was listening. The one whose funeral Dante had attended with a face like carved marble, present but absent, mourning something other than the man in the coffin. Naomi had served coffee at that funeral, had watched Dante stand at the graveside, hands clasped, eyes distant. She'd thought he looked sad. Now she wondered if he'd just looked guilty. She should have thrown the paper away. Should have walked out of that room and never thought about it again. Should have remembered her mother's warnings about curiosity and consequences. Instead, she unfolded the trash bag. Inside were hundreds of shredded pieces. A whole book torn apart. She could see fragments of names, numbers, dates, all of it destroyed, all of it hidden. Her heart pounded as she dug deeper. She didn't know what she was looking for. Didn't even know why she was looking. But something about Luca's death didn't sit right. The timing. The whispers. The way the other staff had gone quiet whenever his name came up. The way Marcus Tate, the head of security, had started carrying his gun openly instead of concealed. Something had happened. Something big enough to kill a man who'd been Dante's friend for 20 years. She pulled out another piece of paper. This one had a single word written in bold letters at the top. Ledger. Her breath caught. Ledgers meant records. Records meant evidence. Evidence meant someone was keeping track of things that weren't supposed to be tracked. A door slammed somewhere upstairs. Naomi's breath stopped. She shoved the papers back into the bag, tied it shut, grabbed her cleaning supplies. Her hand was shaking so hard she nearly dropped the duster. She could hear footsteps now, heavy, purposeful, coming down the hallway toward the study. She walked out of that study faster than she'd ever moved in her life, her heart hammering against her ribs. She passed Marcus Tate in the hallway. He glanced at the trash bag in her hand, then at her face. "You okay?" he asked. His voice was flat, professional, but his eyes were sharp, taking in every detail, her flushed cheeks, her shallow breathing, the way her fingers gripped the bag too tight. "Fine," she managed. "Just running late." He nodded slowly. Didn't move. Just watch her walk past, his gaze following her until she turned the corner. But it was too late. She'd seen too much. And in a house like this, seeing too much was the same as signing your own death warrant. That night, Naomi couldn't sleep. She lay in her narrow bed in the staff quarters, staring at the ceiling, replaying every second of that morning. The shredded papers. Luca's name. The word ledger burned into her mind like a brand. She thought about her mother, who'd cleaned houses her whole life and died at 52 with nothing to show for it, but arthritic hands and a funeral bill Naomi was still paying off. She thought about all the years of being invisible, of swallowing questions, of pretending not to see the things that happen in houses like this. She thought about walking away, finding a new job, forgetting she'd ever seen Dante Valloni's name written next to words like offshore and transfers. But she knew the truth. It was already too late to walk away. The next evening, the mansion's head of security, Marcus Tate with a scar running down his left cheek like a warning, stopped her in the hallway. "Boss wants to see you," he said. No emotion, no explanation. Naomi's stomach twisted. "When?" "Soon." He walked away before she could ask anything else. She stood there in the empty hallway, staring at her ink-stained fingers, wondering if she'd just made the last mistake of her life. Now, standing in the darkness with Dante Valloni close enough to touch, Naomi realized the mistake hadn't been looking at the papers. The mistake had been thinking she could get away with it. "I asked you a question," Dante said. His voice was soft, patient, the kind of patience a predator uses when it knows the prey has nowhere to run. Naomi's throat went dry. "I was dusting, sir. That's all." Lightning lit up his face again. His jaw was tight. His eyes, his eyes, were studying her like she was a puzzle he was about to solve. There was intelligence there, the kind that came from years of reading people, of knowing exactly when they were lying and exactly how to make them tell the truth. "Dusting," he repeated slowly, tasting the word like bad wine. "Yes, sir." Thunder rolled overhead, shaking the windows. The rain was coming down sideways now, battering the mansion like it wanted to break in. Or maybe it was trying to wash something away. Blood, perhaps. Guilt. The weight of all the terrible things that had happened in this house. Dante stepped closer. Close enough that she had to tilt her head back to look at him. Close enough that she could see the faint stubble on his jaw, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his chest rose and fell with each breath. Close enough to kill her with his bare hands if he wanted to. And she knew, everyone knew, that Dante Valloni was capable of exactly that. "Do you believe in God, Naomi?" The question caught her off guard. She blinked. "What? God?" He tilted his head slightly, like a curious animal. "Do you believe in him?" Her hands were still pressed against the counter behind her. She didn't dare move. "Yes." Dante's expression didn't change. "Then pray he forgives you." Her blood turned to ice. "For the things you've seen." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and final. A death sentence wrapped in philosophy. Naomi wanted to run, wanted to scream, wanted to do anything except stand there while this man, this monster, decided whether she lived or died. Her mind raced through options. The kitchen was 20 feet away. There were knives there, but Dante would catch her before she took 3 steps. The front door was locked. The windows were too high. The staff quarters were empty. She was trapped, but she couldn't move, couldn't speak. All she could do was stare at him while her heart tried to beat its way out of her chest. Then, instead of killing her, Dante did something she didn't expect. He stepped back. The space between them felt like a reprieve, like breathing after drowning. "Follow me," he said. "What?" "You heard me." He turned toward the hallway. "Walk." Naomi didn't move. Her legs felt like they were made of stone. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to fight, to do something other than obey the man who just threatened her life. Dante glanced over his shoulder. His eyes caught hers in the dim light. "You can follow me, Naomi. Or you can stay here and wonder what happens when Marcus comes looking for you." It wasn't a choice. It was a command wrapped in a threat. She followed. They walked through the mansion in silence. The only sound were the storm outside and the echo of their footsteps on marble. Dante moved like a man who owned the world, shoulders back, hand relaxed, every step deliberate. He moved like violence in a well-cut suit. Like death with good manners. Naomi trailed behind him, her cleaning rag still clutched in one hand like a lifeline. She noticed things she'd never noticed before. The way the portraits on the walls seemed to watch them pass. The way certain doors had new locks. The way the house smelled different in the darkness. Less like luxury and more like something older. Something that had seen too much. He led her to his private office. The door was already open. Inside, the room glowed with candlelight, dozens of them scattered across the desk, the shelves, the windowsill. The air smelled like whiskey and firewood and something metallic underneath. Copper, maybe, or blood that had been scrubbed from expensive surfaces. On the desk, perfectly centered, was a black leather ledger. The same one she'd seen shredded in the trash 2 days ago. Except now it was whole. Naomi's stomach dropped. He'd known. He'd known from a moment she touched those papers. Maybe before. Maybe he'd left them there as a test, waiting to see what she'd do. Dante walked to the desk, poured himself a drink from a crystal decanter. He didn't offer her one. Just stood there, swirling the amber liquid in his glass, staring at the ledger like it was a living thing. Like it had teeth. "You think I killed Luca?" he said quietly. Naomi didn't answer. Didn't breathe. Dante turned to face her. Everyone does. The candlelight made shadows dance across his face. He looked older suddenly. Tired. Like a man carrying a weight he'd been dragging for years. For a moment, just a moment, he looked almost human. But the truth, Naomi... He paused, took a slow sip of his drink. The truth is uglier. She swallowed hard. What truth? His eyes locked onto hers. Luca wasn't loyal. He sold us, me, my family, my men, to the Fioris. He would have gotten every person in this house slaughtered. The words came out flat. Matter of fact. Like he was talking about the weather or stock prices or anything other than murder. I did what I had to. Naomi's hands went numb. She didn't know if he was telling the truth or testing her. Didn't know if this was a confession or a trap. Men like Dante didn't confess. They justified. They reframed. They made you believe that monsters could be heroes if the lighting was right. Dante poured another glass. This time, he held it out to her. She didn't take it. "You're afraid of me," he said. It wasn't a question. Shouldn't I be? Her voice shook despite her best effort. For the first time since she'd met him, Dante smiled. Not the dangerous smile from before. Something smaller. Sadder. Almost genuine. "Fear is good," he said quietly. "It means you still have something to lose. What would you do if you were standing in that room? Tell me in the comments." Dante set the second glass down on the desk. Untouched. Then he sat down, leaned back in his chair, and let out a long breath. For a moment, he looked almost human, almost vulnerable. The armor he wore, the expensive clothes, the controlled voice, the predatory confidence, slipped just enough for her to see the man underneath. He looked exhausted. "You want to know what was in that ledger?" he asked. Naomi didn't answer. Her throat was too tight. Dante opened it, flipped through pages slowly, deliberately. Each turn of the page sounded too loud in the quiet room. Names, dates, transactions. Every deal Luca made behind my back. Every lie he told. Every dollar he stole. He stopped on a page, tapped it with one finger. "This right here? This is proof he was funneling money to Enzo Fiori. Proof he was planning to testify against me in exchange for immunity." He looked up at her. "Proof that if I hadn't stopped him, I'd be in prison right now. Or dead." Naomi's mind raced. She didn't know what to believe. Didn't know if any of this was real or just another layer of manipulation. Dante Vallone hadn't survived 3 generations of mob politics by being honest. He'd survived by being smarter, more ruthless, and more convincing than everyone else. "Why are you telling me this?" she whispered. Dante closed the ledger. The sound of it shutting felt final, like a door closing on something that couldn't be reopened, because you saw something you weren't supposed to see, and now you're a problem. Her stomach dropped. But he stood up, walked around the desk until he was standing in front of her again. "You're also an opportunity." Naomi's pulse hammered in her ears. "I don't understand." "You will." He reached into his desk drawer, pulled out a sealed envelope. White, unmarked, heavy paper that whispered of money and power and things that happen in shadows. He held it out to her. She stared at it like it was a bomb, like touching it would blow her life apart. Maybe it would. "Tomorrow," Dante said, "you're going to take this to the Belmont Hotel. Room 805. Ask for Victor Rami. Give him this envelope. Do not open it. Do not read it. Just deliver it and leave. Naomi's hands shook as she took the envelope. It was heavier than she expected, weighted with whatever secrets it contained. What's inside? Dante's expression went cold. The vulnerability from moments before vanished like it had never existed. The mask was back. Justice. The word hung in the air like smoke. And if I don't? She asked. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off him. Close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his gray eyes. Close enough to remind her exactly who she was dealing with. Then you'll spend the rest of your life wondering when Marcus is going to knock on your door in the middle of the night. It was a threat. Clear, simple, brutal, but there was something else in his eyes. Something that looked almost like respect, or maybe just recognition. The acknowledgement that she'd chosen to look at those papers, that she'd chosen to ask questions, that she had more spine than most people who walk through his doors. If you survive tomorrow, Naomi, Dante said quietly, you'll never clean another man's mess again. She didn't know if that was a promise or a warning. All she knew was that she was holding an envelope that could either set her free or get her killed. Dante walked back to his desk, sat down, picked up his glass. You can go now. Naomi turned toward the door. Her legs felt like they might give out any second. Each step felt wrong, like walking away from a tiger that was deciding whether or not to pounce. One more thing, Dante called after her. She stopped. Looked back. His eyes were unreadable. Don't make me regret this. The words carried weight. History. The ghosts of everyone who'd ever disappointed him, and pay the price. Would you take the deal or walk away? Comment below. I'd love to know. Naomi didn't sleep that night. She sat on the edge of her bed in the staff quarters, staring at the white envelope on her nightstand. The storm had passed. The mansion was quiet now. Too quiet. The staff quarters were in the West Wing, small rooms that smelled like industrial detergent and decades of other people's dreams dying slow deaths. Her room had a single window that looked out over the gardens. In daylight, they were beautiful. At night, they looked like a graveyard where the dead things grew. She kept replaying Dante's words in her head. If you survive tomorrow, you'll never clean another man's mess again. What did that mean? Freedom? Death? Both? She picked up the envelope, turned it over in her hands. It was sealed tight with red wax, an old-fashioned touch that felt both elegant and threatening. The wax pressed in her fingertips, still slightly soft, like it had been sealed recently. Like Dante had been planning this for days, maybe weeks. She held it up to the lamplight, trying to see through it. Nothing, just shadows and paper. The contents could be anything. Evidence, threats, photographs, a single bullet with someone's name on it. For a moment, she considered tearing it open. Just a peek, just enough to know what she was walking into. But Dante's voice echoed in her mind. Do not open it. She sat back down. The clock on the wall read 4:17 a.m. In less than 12 hours, she'd be standing in room 805 of the Belmont Hotel, handing this envelope to a man named Victor Rami. A man she'd never met. A man who might kill her the second she walked through the door. Or maybe he'd just take the envelope and let her walk away. Maybe. Naomi stood up, walked to the window. The city lights glowed in the distance, soft and warm. She'd lived in New Jersey her whole life. 29 years of invisible labor, quiet survival, and keeping her head down. She'd cleaned houses for politicians, CEOs, criminals. She'd seen things that would make most people run screaming. She'd seen a congressman's daughter overdose in a bathroom while her father gave a speech about family values downstairs. She'd cleaned blood off marble after a hedge fund manager fell down the stairs. She'd found bags of cash hidden in air vents, prescription bottles without labels, phones smashed to pieces and buried in trash cans. But she'd never spoken a word, never asked questions. That was the deal. The invisible got to stay alive as long as they stayed invisible. Until now. She pressed her palm against the cold glass. Her reflection stared back at her. Tired eyes, tight jaw, hands that wouldn't stop shaking. She looked like her mother. Same narrow face, same worry lines forming between her eyebrows, same exhaustion that came from carrying other people's secrets. What if this is the last thing I ever do? she whispered to herself. The question hung in the air, unanswered. Her phone buzzed. She jumped, heart hammering. A text from an unknown number. Carl will pick you up at 10 a.m. Don't be late. M. Marcus. Of course. Dante didn't do anything without his security chief knowing. By 9 a.m., she was dressed. Simple black pants, white blouse, her hair pulled back in a tight bun. She looked like every other invisible worker in the city. That was the point. Blend in. Don't be remembered. Don't be seen. She'd learned that from her mother, who'd spent 40 years cleaning other people's homes and died without anyone outside her family knowing her name. Not even an obituary in the paper. Just another immigrant who'd worked herself to death for minimum wage and disappeared like she'd never existed. Naomi wouldn't let that be her story. She slipped the envelope into her purse, took one last look around her room, then walked out the door. The car was waiting outside, a black sedan with tinted windows, idling in the circular driveway. Marcus sat in the driver's seat, expressionless as always. He didn't say a word when she climbed into the back. Just put the car in drive and pulled away from the mansion. They drove in silence. Naomi watched the suburbs blur into the city, watched New Jersey turn into the tunnel, watched darkness swallow them whole before spitting them out into Manhattan's glittering chaos. The bus ride to Manhattan took an hour. She sat in the back, clutching her purse, watching the city blur past the window. Every bump in the road made her heart jump. Every stop made her wonder if she should just get off and disappear. Run to the bus station. Buy a ticket to anywhere. Change her name. Never look back. But she didn't, because she knew the truth. You couldn't run from men like Dante Vallone. They had reach, connections, resources that made borders meaningless. If she ran, he'd find her. And when he did, there wouldn't be any more chances. By 11:30 a.m., she was standing outside the Belmont Hotel. It was one of those places where doormen wore white gloves and the lobby smelled like money. Old money. The kind that came from families who'd been rich for so long they'd forgotten what poverty looked like. She walked through the revolving doors, her shoes clicking on polished marble. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings. Everything gleamed. Everything cost more than she'd make in a year. No one looked at her. She was invisible again. Just another worker in a city full of them. She found the elevator, pressed the button for the 8th floor. The door slid shut. Soft music played overhead. Her reflection stared back at her from the mirrored walls, small, scared, alone. Just like always. The elevator dinged. 8th floor. Naomi stepped out into a long, carpeted hallway. Room 805 was at the end. She could see the gold numbers glinting in the soft light. Her legs felt heavy. Each step took effort. Her mind screamed at her to turn around, to run, to choose life over whatever was waiting behind that door. But her body kept walking. She reached the door, raised her hand to knock, then stopped. This was it. The moment everything changed. One way or another, the woman who walked out of this room wouldn't be the same woman who walked in. She thought about her mother, about all the times she'd told Naomi to be careful, to not rock the boat, to survive by staying small. Then she thought about Dante's words. You'll never clean another man's mess again. She knocked 3 times. Firm. Footsteps approached from inside. The lock clicked. The door opened. Victor Rami stood in the doorway, tall, mid-50s, expensive suit, slick back hair. He looked like every smooth-talking businessman she'd ever cleaned up after. Confident. Untouchable. The kind of man who'd never looked at a cleaning woman long enough to remember her face. He smiled. Can I help you? Naomi's voice came out steady, stronger than she felt. I have a delivery for you. From Dante Vallone. Victor's smile faltered, just for a second. Then it was back, wider than before. But something had changed in his eyes. Fear, maybe, or recognition. Come in. She stepped inside. The room was massive, king-size bed, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a bar cart in the corner. Victor closed the door behind her. The sound of the lock clicking made her flinch. What is it? He asked. Naomi reached in her purse, pulled out the envelope, held it out. Victor took it. His hands were steady, confident. He walked to the window, tore open the seal, pulled out the contents, then froze. His face went pale, ash white, like all the blood had drained out of him in an instant. Naomi watched as he flipped through what looked like photographs. Dozens of them. His hands started shaking. His jaw went tight. She could see the tendons in his neck standing out like cables. Then he saw the note. She couldn't read it from where she stood, but she saw his reaction, the way his knees buckled slightly, the way he grabbed the edge of the desk to steady himself, the way all the confidence bled out of him like water from a broken glass. His phone rang. He stared at it like it was a snake. Then, slowly, he answered. "Hello." Naomi couldn't hear the voice on the other end, but she saw Victor's face collapse, saw the terror flood his eyes, saw a powerful man reduced to something small and broken in the span of seconds. I can explain," he stammered. "Please just—" The voice on the other end cut him off. Victor's hand flew to his mouth. His eyes went wide. Whatever he was hearing, it was destroying him. Victor sank into the chair by the window. His hand was shaking so hard he nearly dropped the phone. When the call ended, he just sat there, staring at nothing, breathing like he'd just run a marathon, like he'd just seen his own death and couldn't look away. Naomi didn't wait for him to recover. She turned, walked to the door, opened it. "Wait," Victor called after her. His voice cracked. "Who are you?" She looked back at him one last time. Saw a man who'd probably destroyed lives without a second thought. Saw him broken, terrified, human, finally. Nobody. Then she walked out. When I stepped into the rain again, I realized I'd just become part of something no one would believe. What do you think was in that envelope? Drop your theory below. The rain hit Naomi's face the second she stepped out of the Belmont Hotel. She didn't run, didn't look back, just walked, fast, steady, invisible again. Her heart was still hammering from what she'd just witnessed. Victor Rami's face drained of color. The photographs scattered across his desk. The way his hand shook when he answered that phone call. She delivered death wrapped in an envelope, and she hadn't even known it. The subway station was 2 blocks away. She kept her head down, weaving through crowds of tourists and businessmen. Nobody looked at her. Nobody ever did. That's what saved her life most days, being forgettable. But now, walking through Manhattan with rain soaking through her blouse, she felt different. Marked, like she'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. Like she'd become something other than invisible. She reached the subway entrance, descended the concrete steps. The platform was packed. Afternoon rush, bodies pressed together, everyone in their own world. She found a spot near the back, pressed herself against the tiled wall. Her purse felt lighter now. Empty. The envelope was gone, but its weight still pressed against her chest. The train screeched into the station. Doors hissed open. People pushed past her, shoving, rushing. She stepped inside, grabbed a pole, closed her eyes. That's when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Her stomach dropped. She stared at the screen, debating whether to answer. It buzzed again, then a third time. The train lurched. She grabbed the pole tighter. 4th buzz. She answered. "Hello." Silence. Just breathing on the other end. Steady. Calm. Predatory. Then Dante's voice, low and calm. "You delivered it." It wasn't a question. "Yes," she whispered. "Good." A pause. She could hear something in the background. Ice clinking in a glass. "Come back to the house tonight." "Alone." The line went dead. Naomi's hands went cold. She looked around the subway car. Strangers pressed together, staring at phones, lost in their own worlds. None of them knew what she'd just done. None of them knew she just triggered something that would ripple through the city's underground like an earthquake. The woman next to her was reading a romance novel. The man across from her was sleeping, his head bobbing with the motion of the train. A teenager scrolled through social media, oblivious. Normal people living normal lives. And here she was, a courier for the gentleman butcher. The train lurched forward. She gripped the pole tighter. By the time she got back to La Casa Valloni, it was past 8 p.m. The mansion looked different in the darkness. Less like a home, more like a mausoleum. Every window glowed with warm light, but it felt wrong. Artificial, like something pretending to be alive. The gardens were lit by subtle landscape lighting now. She could see them through the iron gates as she approached. They looked beautiful and dead at the same time. Perfect but lifeless. like everything else in this place. She walked up the front steps. The door opened before she could knock. Marcus Tate stood there, same scar, same blank expression. He's waiting for you. He led her through the house in silence. Not to the office this time, to the main parlor, a room she'd cleaned 100 times but never sat in. High ceilings, chandeliers, oil paintings of dead men staring down from the walls. Men who'd built empires on blood and called it business. Dante stood by the fireplace, hands in his pockets, watching flames dance behind the grate. He didn't turn when she entered, just stood there, silhouetted against the firelight, looking like a painting himself, a portrait of power and loneliness. "Sit," he said. Naomi sat on the edge of a leather chair. Her back was rigid, her hands folded in her lap. Marcus left, closing the door behind him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the house, a clock ticked. Time passing, life bleeding away in seconds. Finally, Dante turned. His face was unreadable. "Victor called me 20 minutes after you left." Naomi's pulse quickened. He was crying. Dante's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. Begging, offering me everything he had, money, information, loyalty, all of it. He walked closer, stopping a few feet in front of her. "Do you know I told him?" She shook her head. "I told him it was too late." Dante's voice was quiet, gentle almost. "That the moment he betrayed my family, he signed his own death warrant, and no amount of crying would change that." Naomi felt her throat tighten. What was in the envelope? Dante didn't answer right away. He just looked at her, studying her like she was a puzzle he was still trying to solve. "Proof," he said finally. "Photos of Victor laundering money through my accounts. Evidence of him selling weapons to the Fiore family. Documentation of every lie, every theft, every betrayal." He leaned against the mantel. "That phone call you heard? That was me telling him exactly how his life was going to end." The words hung in the air, cold and final. Naomi's hands trembled. "You used me." "Yes." No hesitation. No apology. "I did." She wanted to scream, wanted to run, but her body wouldn't move. All she could do was sit there while the fire crackled and Dante Valloni watched her with those smoke and ice eyes. Dante pushed off the mantel, walked to a side table, poured 2 glasses of whiskey. This time, he didn't ask, just handed her one. She took it. Her hand shook so hard the liquid sloshed against the sides. "You're angry," Dante said. Not question, a statement. "Shouldn't I be?" He sat down across from her. For the first time, he looked almost tired, almost human. "Probably." He took a slow sip. "But you did more for justice today than half the cops in this city." Naomi stared at him. "Justice? You call that justice? I call it necessity." His voice hardened. "Victor Rami was selling weapons to people who wanted me dead, who wanted my family dead. He was profiting off blood, other people's blood. The courts wouldn't touch him. The FBI couldn't touch him. So I did." He set his glass down. "That's quiet justice, Naomi. The kind no one sees. The kind that actually works." She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was wrong. But she'd seen enough of the world to know that sometimes the law was just another word for whatever the powerful could get away with. Was Dante right? Or was this just revenge dressed up as justice? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Dante stood up, walked to his desk in the corner, opened a drawer. Naomi watched him, her heart still racing, her mind still spinning. She didn't know if she should thank him or hate him. Didn't know if she was free or just deeper in the trap. He pulled out a small velvet envelope. Dark blue. Elegant. Then he walked back to her and held it out. She stared at it. "What is that?" "Open it." Her hand was still shaking as she took it. The velvet was soft under her fingers. She opened the flap, reached inside, pulled out a folded piece of paper. A check. Her eyes went wide. $250,000. Her breath stopped. She looked up at Dante, then back at the check, then back at him. I don't understand." "Payment," he said simply, "for your silence and your freedom." Naomi's mind reeled. This was more money than she'd see in 10 years of cleaning houses. More money than her mother had seen in a lifetime. This was enough to change everything. To start over. To be someone other than invisible. "You're letting me go?" Her voice cracked. Dante sat back down, his expression softer now. Almost human. I don't keep good people in cages. She didn't know what to say. Didn't know if this was real or another manipulation. Her hands gripped the check so hard it crumpled at the edges. Why? She whispered. Dante leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant. Because you remind me of someone I used to know. Someone who believed people could change. He paused. Someone who was wrong. The words cut deeper than he probably meant them to. Naomi looked down at the check again. Freedom. Actual freedom. She could leave this house. Leave this city. Start over somewhere no one knew her name. But there was a cost. There was always a cost. What do you want from me? She asked quietly. Nothing. He met her eyes. Just forget you ever worked here. Forget what you saw. Forget my name. She studied his face, searching for the lie. But all she saw was exhaustion. A man carrying too many ghosts. Can I ask you something? Naomi's voice was barely above a whisper. Dante nodded. Do you regret it? Any of it? For a long moment, he didn't answer. Just stared into the fire, jaw tight, hands clasped. Every day, he said finally. But regret doesn't change what's already done. Naomi folded the check, slipped it back into the envelope. She stood up, her legs steadier now. Thank you. Dante looked surprised. For what? For not killing me. He almost smiled. Almost. You're welcome. She turned toward the door. Naomi, he called after her. She stopped. Looked back. His expression was unreadable again. If anyone ever asks about tonight, about Victor, about any of this. I was never here, she finished. He nodded. Smart girl. She walked out of that room, out of that mansion, out of that life. And for the first time in 29 years, she didn't look back. Would you have taken the money or walked away? Tell me in the comments. 3 weeks later, Naomi stood in the doorway of a small townhouse in Atlanta. The air smelled different here. Cleaner, lighter, like the weight of New Jersey had finally lifted off her shoulders. She bought the place cash, 2 bedrooms, a backyard, a porch where she could sit and watch the sunset without wondering if someone was watching her back. The money from Dante had changed everything. New name, new city, new life. No more looking over her shoulder every time a black car drove past. No more wondering if today would be the day someone came to collect on debts she didn't know she owed. She started a cleaning business. Legitimate. Honest. Just her and 2 other women she'd hired from the neighborhood. Maria, who'd escaped an abusive marriage, and Keisha, who was putting herself through nursing school. They cleaned offices, apartments, nothing fancy. But it was hers. No secrets. No blood money. No looking over her shoulder every time a black car drove past. For the first time in her life, Naomi felt free. She spent her mornings drinking coffee on the porch, watching the neighborhood wake up. Kids walking to school. Neighbors watering gardens. Normal life happening all around her. She'd forgotten what normal felt like. Her afternoons were spent working, her evenings reading books she'd never had time for before. She made friends, real friends, not just co-workers who tolerated her presence. She laughed. She breathed. She lived. Some nights, she'd lie awake and think about Dante Valloni, about the way he'd looked at her in that office, about the check, about Victor Rami's face when he opened that envelope. She wondered if Victor was still alive, if Dante had kept his word, if justice, quiet or otherwise, had actually been served. But mostly, she tried not to think about it all. 2 months turned into 6. 6 turned into a year. Then 2. Atlanta became home. The townhouse became hers. The memories of La Casa Valloni faded like old bruises, still there if you pressed hard enough, but easier to ignore. She was washing dishes one Sunday morning when she heard the mail slot click. Naomi dried her hands, walked to the front door. A small stack of envelopes lay on the floor, bills, advertisements, nothing important. Except for one. Black. Unmarked. No return address. Her heart stopped. She bent down, picked it up. The paper was thick, expensive, the same kind Dante used for his personal correspondence. Her hands trembled as she tore it open. Inside was a single photograph. Dante Valloni, lying in a hospital bed. His face was gaunt, pale. Wires ran from his chest to machines that beeped softly in the background. His eyes were closed. He looked smaller somehow, like death had already started taking pieces of him. She flipped the photo over. On the back, written in the same elegant handwriting she remembered, were 7 words. Some debts never stay buried. D. Naomi's breath caught. She stared at the photo, her mind racing. Was this a warning? A threat? A cry for help? Or was it his way of reminding her that no matter how far she ran, the past never really let you go? She looked out the window. The street was quiet, normal, safe. But suddenly, it didn't feel that way anymore. If you've ever walked away from something that nearly destroyed you, leave a heart emoji in the comments. Naomi couldn't sleep that night. She sat on her porch, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the photograph. The streetlights cast long shadows across her yard. Every car that passed made her tense. Every sound made her look up. She kept turning the photo over, reading those 7 words again and again. Some debts never stay buried. What debt? She'd delivered the envelope. She'd kept his secrets. She'd disappeared like he asked. She'd taken the money and built a new life and never spoke his name to anyone. What more did he want? Or maybe it wasn't about what he wanted. Maybe it was about what he needed. She studied the photograph again in the porch light. The hospital bed, the machines, the way his face looked, defeated, broken, nothing like the man who'd stood in the darkness and told her to pray for forgiveness. Nothing like the predator in the expensive suit. He looked human, mortal, dying. Was he dying? The thought twisted something in her chest. She didn't owe him anything. He'd used her, manipulated her, put her life in danger for his own agenda, turned her into a courier for death, and called it justice. But he'd also let her go, paid her, given her a life she never thought she'd have, given her freedom when he could have just as easily buried her in the same grave as Victor Rami. She didn't know if that made them even or just made things more complicated. The night air was cool. She could hear crickets chirping in the bushes, the distant sound of a dog barking. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. The sounds of a life she'd built from blood money and silence. Naomi thought about her mother again. About all the years of cleaning other people's messes and dying with nothing to show for it. About the warnings she'd given. Keep your head down, don't ask questions, survive by staying invisible. But Naomi wasn't invisible anymore. She'd seen too much, done too much, become too much. The photograph felt heavy in her hands, like it carried the weight of all the choices she'd made, all the lines she'd crossed. By morning, she'd made a decision. She called her business partner, told her she needed a few days away. Family emergency. The lie came easily now. Too easily. She'd learned how to lie from the best. From men who smiled while they destroyed you, who justified murder with philosophy. Then she booked a flight to Newark. The plane landed at 3 p.m. The familiar skyline made her stomach clench. She'd sworn she'd never come back. Had promised herself that New Jersey was in her past, that the gentleman butcher and La Casa Valoni and all of it was just a bad dream she'd woken up from. But here she was, back in the city that had almost killed her. She rented a car, drove to New Jersey, her heart pounding the entire way. The roads were familiar in a way that made her skin crawl. Every exit, every landmark triggered memories she'd try to bury. She didn't know what she was going to say. Didn't know if he'd even be alive when she got there. Didn't know if this was the stupidest thing she'd ever done or the only thing she could do. But she had to know. The hospital was on the edge of the city, private, expensive, the kind of place where dying came with silk sheets and room service, where the wealthy went to have their mortality managed with the same discretion as their tax returns. She walked through the lobby, past nurses and visitors, following signs to the ICU. Her shoes clicked on the polished floors. Security cameras watched from corners. Everything was clean, sterile, nothing like the blood and chaos that men like Dante usually left behind. Room 412. She stood outside the door, her hand hovering over the handle. This was insane. She should leave. Should go back to Atlanta and forget she'd ever seen that photograph. Should let whatever debt Dante thought existed die with him. But instead, she pushed the door open. Dante was awake. He turned his head slowly, his eyes finding hers. For a moment, neither of them spoke. He looked smaller somehow, fragile, like all the power he'd carried had leaked out through the wires and tubes. His skin was gray, his eyes sunken, his hands, those hands that had probably killed more people than she could imagine, rested on the white sheets, thin and weak. But his eyes were still sharp, still intelligent, still seeing everything. "You came," he said. His voice was rough, weak, but there was something like surprise in it, maybe even gratitude. Naomi stepped inside, closed the door behind her. "I shouldn't have." A faint smile crossed his lips. "But you did." She walked closer, stopping at the foot of his bed. The machines beeped rhythmically, counting down his remaining heartbeats, and 4-drip fed clear liquid into his arm. Monitors tracked vitals that were clearly failing. "What happened?" she asked, though she already knew. The photograph had told her enough. "Cancer." He said it like it was nothing, like it was just another business deal gone wrong. "Stage 4. Pancreatic. They gave me 6 months. That was 8 months ago." His smile widened slightly. "Turns out I'm stubborn." Her chest tightened. She didn't know what to say, didn't know how to feel. This man had terrified her, had threatened her, had sent her to deliver an envelope that had probably gotten someone killed. But he'd also given her freedom, given her a chance. "Why did you send me that photo?" she asked. "Dantisch Eichmethirsch." Even weakened, even dying, they still had that intensity, that ability to see straight through you. "Because I wanted you to know." "Know what?" "That even monsters die." The words hung between them, heavy and raw. Naomi felt something crack inside her. She didn't know if it was anger or sadness or something she didn't have a name for. Some complicated emotion that came from watching someone who'd had absolute power reduced to flesh and blood and failing organs. "You didn't owe me that," she said quietly. "No." He looked away, staring at the ceiling. "But you were the only person who ever looked at me like I was more than what I did, even if it was just for a second." She remembered that night in his office. The way he'd looked exhausted, human. The way he'd talked about regret like it was a constant companion. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, Naomi. I'm just tired." The word carried decades of weight. Decades of blood and lies and choices that couldn't be undone. Decades of being the gentleman butcher, the man everyone feared, the monster in expensive suits. She stood there for a long time, watching him breathe, watching the machines track his heartbeat. The numbers on the monitors were low. Too low. Even she could see that. "How long?" she asked. "Days." He closed his eyes. "Maybe hours." The doctors stopped trying to predict. She thought about leaving, about walking out and never looking back, about letting him die alone with his ghosts and his regrets. But she didn't move. "Do you have anyone?" The question surprised her even as she asked it. Dante's laugh was bitter. "I had everyone. Now I have no one." He opened his eyes again. "That's what happens when you build an empire on fear. When you die, the empire dies with you. And everyone you thought was loyal was just waiting for permission to forget you." The truth in that statement was devastating. "What happened to Victor?" she asked suddenly. Dante's expression didn't change. "He had a heart attack 3 days after you delivered that envelope. Very tragic, very sudden. The words were casual, but they carried the weight of murder wrapped in plausible deniability." "Did you? Does it matter?" Dante cut her off. "He was a dead man the moment he betrayed me. The heart attack just made it official." Naomi swallowed hard. Part of her wanted to be horrified. Part of her understood. In Dante's world, betrayal had only one punishment. The method was just details. She moved to the chair beside his bed. Sat down. She didn't know why. Didn't know what she was doing or why she was staying. Dante watched her with something like wonder. "You're staying." It wasn't a question. "For a little while," she said. "Why?" She thought about the question. Thought about all the reasons she should leave. All the reasons this man didn't deserve her compassion or her time. Then she thought about the photograph. The 7 words. "Some debts never stay buried." Maybe the debt wasn't hers. Maybe it was his. "Because everyone should have someone," she said finally. "Even monsters." Dante closed his eyes. She thought she saw something like tears at the corners, but it might have been the medication. Might have been pain. "Thank you," he whispered. They sat in silence. The machines beeped. Time passed. Outside the window, the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Finally, Dante spoke again. His voice was softer now, weaker. Naomi, yes. I'm sorry. The words hung in the air. Simple, small, completely insufficient for everything he'd done, but honest in a way he'd probably never been before. She didn't respond, just sat there, watching him breathe, watching death creep closer with each passing minute. Then, instead of leaving, she did something she didn't expect. She reached out and took his hand. His fingers were cold, weak, but they tightened around hers, holding on like a drowning man holding on a driftwood. They stayed like that as the sun set, as the room grew dark, as the machines beeped their steady countdown. And when Dante's breathing finally slowed, when the monitors started alarming, when nurses rushed in with crash carts and urgent voices, Naomi stood up and walked out. She'd done what she came to do. She'd let the monster die human. Was this goodbye or another beginning? What do you think? Drop your answer below. Naomi flew back to Atlanta that same night. She didn't tell anyone where she'd been. Didn't talk about the hospital or the man dying in room 412. She just went back to work, back to her routine, back to the life she'd built from nothing. But something had changed. She couldn't stop thinking about what Dante had said. About being tired. About dying. About the weight of carrying all that blood and guilt for so many years. About how everyone he thought was loyal had just been waiting for permission to forget him. She thought about the envelope she'd delivered. About Victor Rami. About Luca Marcelli. About all the people who'd been caught in the crossfire of Dante's version of justice. She didn't know if what he'd done was right or wrong. Didn't know if justice could ever really be quiet. Didn't know if the world was better or worse with men like Dante Vallone in it. All she knew was that some people spent their whole lives trying to balance the scales, and some people just broke them instead. And somehow, she'd gotten caught in the middle. She'd become part of his story, part of his final chapter. The cleaning woman who'd delivered death and received freedom. The invisible woman who'd witnessed the monster's humanity. 3 weeks later, she got a call from an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, almost let it go to voicemail. She'd started screening calls since coming back from New Jersey, paranoid that someone from Dante's world would come looking for her. That Marcus Tate would show up on her doorstep with questions she couldn't answer. But something made her pick up. Hello. Silence. Then a voice she didn't recognize. Professional. Measured. Ms. Hensley? Yes. This is Dr. Kareem from Newark Memorial. I'm calling about Dante Vallone. Her heart stopped. She already knew what he was going to say. Had known it since the moment she left that hospital room. He passed away this morning. Peacefully. In his sleep. Naomi closed her eyes. She didn't cry. Didn't gasp. Just stood there. Phone pressed her ear, feeling something heavy settle in her chest. Relief, maybe. Or sadness. Or that complicated emotion that came from knowing the world had lost a monster and a man at the same time. He left instructions. The doctor continued. Said if anything happened to him, we should call you. Her throat tightened. Why? He wanted you to know. A pause. And he wanted me to give you a message. Naomi's hands started shaking. What message? He said to tell you. Some debts stay buried after all. The line went quiet. She could hear her own heartbeat in the silence. Could hear the ceiling fan spinning in her living room. Could hear life continuing around her like nothing had happened. But everything had happened. Ms. Hensley, the doctor said. Are you still there? Yes, she managed. Thank you for calling. She hung up before he could say anything else. Naomi stood on her porch, staring out at the street. The sun was setting. The sky was turning gold and pink and purple. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Kids rode bikes down the sidewalk. A car pulled into a driveway. Life went on. It always did. She thought about Dante Vallone, about the gentleman butcher, about the man who'd caught her in the dark and decided not to kill her, about the monster who'd taught her that even in a world full of blood and lies, there were still people trying to do the right thing, even if they did it all wrong. She didn't know if that made him a villain or a savior. Maybe he was both. Maybe that's what quiet justice really meant. Not right or wrong. Not good or evil. Just people trying to survive in a world that didn't care either way. People making impossible choices and living with the consequences. Naomi folded her arms across her chest, watching the sun disappear below the horizon. She thought about the money in her bank account, the townhouse she owned, the business she'd built, the life she was living. All of it paid for with blood money. All of it built on secrets and silence. All of it made possible by a monster's last act of grace. She could tell herself it was restitution, that she'd earned it by delivering that envelope, by keeping his secrets, by being there at the end when everyone else had abandoned him. But the truth was simpler and more complicated than that. She was free because Dante Villoni had chosen to free her. And now he was free too. In whatever way dying freed you from the weight of your choices. They called him the gentleman butcher, a killer in expensive suits, a monster with perfect manners. But that night, in the dark, she'd seen something else. A man who carried the weight of his choices until it killed him. A man who believed that some sins could be balanced with other sins. A man who gave her freedom when he could have taken everything. She didn't forgive him, didn't forget what he'd done, couldn't pretend that blood money didn't have blood on it. But she understood him, and maybe, in the end, that was enough. The sky went dark. The stars came out. Naomi turned and walked back inside her house. The house she'd bought with blood money. The house that represented everything she'd survived. She closed the door, locked it, and finally, after 2 years of looking over her shoulder, she let herself breathe. She made herself tea, sat at her kitchen table, looked at the photograph of Dante one last time, then slipped it into a drawer. Not thrown away, not displayed, just stored. A memory of a moment when she'd been part of something bigger and darker than herself. Tomorrow, she'd wake up and go to work. She'd clean offices with Maria and Keisha. She'd laugh at their jokes. She'd live her life. But tonight, she sat in her quiet house and thought about debts. The ones we owe, the ones owed to us, the ones that follow us no matter how far we run, and the ones that sometimes finally get buried. Dante had been wrong about a lot of things, but maybe he'd been right about one. Some debts do stay buried after all. At least, she hoped so. Because if they didn't, if they came crawling back up from whatever grave they'd been put in, she didn't know if she'd survive it a second time. She finished her tea, turned off the lights, went to bed, and for the first time since receiving that photograph, she slept through the night. No nightmares, no ghosts, no monsters in expensive suits lurking in the darkness. Just sleep, just peace, just freedom. The kind you can only get by surviving something that should have destroyed you and coming out the other side, still breathing. What do you think? Was Dante a villain or a savior? Let me know in the comments. If this story moved you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another story that inspires, challenges, and makes you think. Drop your thoughts below. I read every single one, and your words might just inspire someone else today. See you in the next story.